The chaotic storm of the Great War had finally passed, but what it left in its wake was not the tranquility of peace, but a permanent, jagged scar sliced across the face of the world, turning what was once a lush, verdant paradise teeming with life into a colossal graveyard, suffocated and buried under layers of ash and gray dust. The Central Valley, once echoing with the melody of birdsong and rushing streams, now lay silent under a crust of earth cracked open, dry and brittle as the skin of an ancient, dying crocodile. The winds that swept through did not carry the refreshing scent of rain, but instead curled around the dead trees, carrying with them thick clouds of choking dust, draping a shroud of mourning over all living things. The river, the island's pulsating vein that once nourished everything, had been drained to its very last drop, exposing a bare bed of jagged rocks. There, a skeletal Triceratops, the very embodiment of utter desperation, was frantically using its horns, nature's weapons of defense, to dig into the mud now hardened like stone. But the only reward for its exhausting efforts was a cloud of dust and a hoarse, agonizing bellow of thirst. Hunger and thirst had erased all the primal lines of nature, dissolving the boundaries between predator and prey to the point where even the most brutal assassins, the Allosaurus, were reduced to wandering shadows, stepping past collapsing prey without even a glance, for they too lacked the strength to kill, to chew, or to swallow. Amidst this apocalyptic tableau, Kong stood tall on the highest cliff, solitary and majestic like an abandoned god, his deep brown eyes heavy with the burden of anxiety as he gazed down upon his kingdom, taking its final, gasping breaths. His fur, matted with red dust, was a testament to the days of struggling for survival in a hopeless land. A dry branch snapped in Kong's hand with a crisp crack, a sound small yet echoing like the fracture of the last hope. And in that moment of turning his head to look out at the vast, endless ocean, Kong knew, with a deep, instinctive certainty, that it was time to leave. To stay was to accept death. At the foot of the sheer cliff, little Suko sat huddled, his hand tapping aimlessly on the ground, his eyes fixed upward on Kong without blinking, a gaze that held not fear, but a desperate expectation, waiting for a miracle, a decision from the only strong back remaining in this withered world. Kong took a deep breath, his chest expanding to its absolute limit, as if to embrace the entire sky into his lungs, and then he delivered a thunderous beat against his chest. Boom! Boom! Like the drums of war, before unleashing a rallying roar that resonated across the land, a sound carrying raw, primal power that woke the entire island from its deathly slumber. That roar penetrated every cave, every withered bush, causing the Allosaurus pack to lift their heads, the Triceratops herd to stop their futile digging, and the prehistoric birds to scatter into the sky. All of them, regardless of species, turned toward the call of the king. They began to move, forming the strangest assembly in history. A ragged, thin, dust-covered army trudging silently toward the clearing at the foot of the mountain where Kong stood waiting. No words were needed. The king's command was absolute and clear through decisive gestures. He pointed to the dry forest, signaling, "Chop," then pointed to the sea, signaling, "Push," effectively ordering the transformation of this dead forest into an ark of salvation. The Allosaurus pack, those biological killing machines, now understood Kong's intent. They threw themselves at the timber, using their razor-sharp teeth like living chainsaws to process the raw wood. The Triceratops herd, with their 1,000-pound battering ram strength, became heavy-duty bulldozers, shoving massive logs that rolled with thunderous noise across the hard ground. Even Suko, the smallest warrior, accepted a crucial mission, scrambling up the towering cliffs to gather vines, dropping them down like a rain of ropes. The gloomy atmosphere of waiting for death vanished completely, replaced by the frantic, urgent, and fierce rhythm of a battle to wrestle life back from the hands of the Reaper. With strength that could move mountains and fill seas, Kong charged at a sequoia tree 3 meters in diameter, slamming his shoulder into it to create a shockwave that shook the earth. then wrapping his arms around the trunk, flexing every muscle to twist his body with a sickening crack, forcing the ancient wooden giant to bow before Titan power. An entire prehistoric construction site operated smoothly under Kong's command. Trees fell, carnivores cleared branches, herbivores transported logs, all creating a symphony of labor and survival. On the beach, dozens of massive tree trunks were stockpiled, and Kong stood amidst the materials, breathing heavily but with eyes burning with determination. He was no longer just a warrior, but now a grand master engineer. Kong began the construction process with the meticulousness of a master architect. He walked along the beach, stomping his feet powerfully to test the sand's subsidence, choosing the spot with the firmest foundation to serve as the dry dock. The first log, 40 meters long, was placed down gently but with absolute precision, defining the spine of the raft and the direction for the future. Dozens of other trunks were laid parallel, creating a vast wooden deck, while bundles of dry, stiff vines were thrown by Kong into the seawater, allowing the salt to soak in, softening them and increasing their tensile strength. Those rough hands that once crushed monsters now skillfully navigated the fibers, tying complex noose knots. Kong used his teeth to bite one end of the vine, his hand pulling the other, arching his neck back to use the full power of his back muscles to tighten the bind until the vine bit deep into the bark. Zuko coordinated perfectly, crawling under the raft to push the vines up to Kong, father and son working in sync like a flawless production line. To ensure the raft could withstand the savage waves, Kong laid the second layer of logs perpendicular to the first, creating a super durable crosshatch grid structure. Not stopping there, he personally crafted giant spikes from polished black ebony wood, using a boulder as a hammer to drive them, bam, bam, through 2 layers of tree trunks, locking them together forever. A shock absorber system was created by bending flexible trees around the raft's rim, and small gaps were caulked tight by the baby dinosaurs using dry moss and clay to ensure absolute safety. But disaster struck when the sand foundation on the left sank, causing the raft to tilt dangerously, threatening to ruin the herd's collective effort. In that moment of peril, Kong dove under the raft, kneeling and using his shoulder to catch the weight of 1,000 tons of wood, his muscles exploding with veins, as if about to burst to hold up the sky, giving Zuko the chance to quickly wedge rocks into the base, saving the situation spectacularly. Once the raft regained its balance, Kong erected a soaring Sequoia trunk in the center to serve as a watchtower, bracing it with 4 massive vines stretched taut like guitar strings to withstand the coming storms. He stomps his foot to test it one last time, a solid thud. Thud, echoing as an affirmation of quality. Safety rails were erected from interwoven small branches, a rare gentle gesture from the king for the weak younglings. As sunset fell, Kong collapsed onto the sand, leaning his back against his magnificent creation, sweat pouring down like rain, washing away the earthly dust. He accepted a coconut from Zuko, drinking it dry and devouring the meat, enjoying a brief moment of rest before darkness consumed the world. Under the star-filled sky, the massive raft cast a deep black shadow. Kong did not sleep. He patrolled around the vessel, feeling every knot, instantly replacing any vine that showed signs of fraying, for he knew the ocean offered no room for error.
It won't hold us both.
Understanding the friction of sand, Kong dug trenches under the raft, working with the Triceratops to place wooden rollers into position, lubricating them with wild fruit oil and wet mud. He prepared stone anchors, a defensive arsenal of boulders, and built a simple shelter for Zuko. When dawn broke, the raft was 100% complete, looking primitive yet majestic like a floating fortress, ready to welcome its first passengers and the meager remaining food supplies. The tide began to rise, the seawater licking at the rows of wooden rollers, signaling that the historic moment had arrived. Kong roared the order to assemble, arranging for the small and weak to board first, followed by the heavy Triceratops, and finally the Allosaurus warriors guarding the four corners. Kong stood in the water, waiting for the level to rise to his waist to utilize Archimedes' buoyancy. He placed both hands on the tail of the raft, preparing for the most extraordinary effort of his life. Feet dug deep into the sand, shoulder braced against the wood. Kong growled, channeling all Titan power into the push, his muscles bulging like ticking time bombs. The raft groaned, budging inch by inch, but the wet sand still sucked tight at the bottom. Just then, a massive wave smashed into the bow, and Kong seized the moment, shouting a thunderous "Roar!" kicking his legs to create deep craters in the seabed, activating an explosive burst of energy to shove the raft thundering forward over the rollers. White foam sprayed wildly as the bow plunged into the deep water, sinking momentarily before popping up, floating free and buoyant. Kong continued to wade, pushing it further to avoid the breaker zone, causing Zuko on the raft to reach out in panic, fearing his foster father would be left behind. But with extraordinary arm strength, Kong swung himself up, causing the entire raft to tilt sharply to one side to welcome its captain. He stepped to the center to restore balance, water streaming from his fur, his cold eyes looking back at the dead land receding into the distance without a shred of regret. The sunset over the sea dyed the space red as the raft drifted into the current, speed increasing significantly, pulling them away from safety. A massive dorsal fin sliced through the water surface, the first warning from the deep ocean. But Kong only silently clenched his fist, his eyes on high alert. Zuko, terrified, nuzzled into Kong's armpit, and he placed a massive hand on its head to reassure it. Night fell, swallowing everything, leaving only the moonlight to illuminate the lonely raft in the vast ocean. Kong sat in meditation at the bow, serving as both navigator and shield against the wind and storm. Though hunger began to bite and memories of the burning island flashed back, Kong remained steadfast, his iron discipline maintained. The wind began to pick up, the bindings stretching twang, twang, signaling the harsh challenges ahead. But far more terrifying than the storm was the danger from below. From a depth of thousands of meters, a pair of gigantic, glowing green eyes opened, staring up at the rectangular shadow on the surface. His sixth sense telling him something was wrong, Kong looked down at the pitch-black water just as a roar echoed from far away, the roar of another alpha. Kong snapped his head up, ears perked. He had heard it. The greatest migration in Earth's history had officially begun, with unforeseeable dangers waiting just ahead.